Okay, good evening, everyone, and thank you very, very much for coming this evening to this event. When I speak, I often tell people that every agency and department in our government has been compromised, and it's not corrupted, it's actually compromised. It no longer functions in service to we the people. So we can argue about who that might be, who it really serves, but only one thing I can guarantee you is that it's not you and I that it is serving. That is for sure. The speakers that we have here this evening had found that of the departments and agencies that have been compromised, among them was their beloved service academies and the military in general. And they, as the rest of us saw the Antifa types burning down our cities and defacing our monuments, and we all said, oh my God, what the hell's going on here? Somebody's got to do something about this. They and their colleagues saw the very same things on their television sets, and they said, oh my God, what the hell's going on here? We've got to do something about this. And so they did. They sprang into action. They got together with their colleagues. They found out that the diversity, equity, and inclusion that we all know very well is sunk into our public schools and into our corporations and into our municipalities, indeed was very deeply embedded into the military. And they have embarked for the last 5 years or so to seek it out, find where the pathways were for that, and to find the areas that were most effective for them to be targeted by the recent executive orders that you see our President Trump has initiated. So I'll let them explain the rest, and with that, it is absolutely my honor to introduce to you the Chief Executive and President of STARRS organization, Air Force Academy graduate, retired colonel, and also a doctor of communications, I believe, Dr. Ron Scott. Very good. And also with us tonight is the General Counsel of STARRS, Air Force Academy graduate, Juris Doctor, and 4-term state senator for the great state of South Carolina, Mr. Michael Rose. Thank you very much. Okay, Dr. Scott, you're going to kick us off? Mr. Rose, very good. Here you go. Thank you, Michael.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real pleasure to be here this evening. I'm Mike Rose from near Charleston, South Carolina. So I've come out here. This is our third presentation in Southern California for the last 3 days. Today, Dr. Colonel Ron Scott and I are going to talk with you about how our American creed, our American way of life, is threatened by radical indoctrination. What is a creed? A creed is any system or codification of a belief or of an opinion, a formal statement of beliefs or principles that summarize its core tenets. The American creed is best understood by its founding documents, which are the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. What's the American creed? All Americans are created equal and endowed by their Creator with the inalienable right of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. That's the American creed. And this is further explained by the academician Samuel P. Huntington in his book, Who Are We? When he said, Americans, it is often said, are a people defined by and united by their commitment to the political principles of liberty, equality, democracy, individualism, human rights, the rule of law, and private property embodied in the American creed. Where does this American creed come from? The source of American creed is grounded in Judeo-Christian principles and traditions. That's why our money currency says, in God we trust. For those of you who have had the privilege of serving our nation, our oath of office closes with, so help me God. Our Constitution and our Bill of Rights were created by the people to protect these inalienable rights. Now I'm going to invite Dr. Colonel Ron Scott to come up and describe how the radical indoctrination of critical race theory is threatening this American creed.
Thanks, Mike. Before I do as Mr. Rose has commanded me, I'd like to introduce one of our directors, one of our board of directors, Dr. Martha Ostrom. So. I'd also like to say that I am just really honored to have met Pastor Gary. We were over in West Germany about the same time. In 1979, my family and I were stationed in West Germany, the height of the Cold War. And so we made 2 trips into Berlin. One of those trips required that we go over into East Berlin, unarmed, unescorted. Just myself with my Air Force uniform, the U.S. insignia on the collar, my pilot wings, and my captain bars. And of course, a beautiful bride on my arm. So she had to go over before me because I was getting briefed on what I can and can't do, which meant she had to cross 150 yards from West Berlin into East Berlin. Halfway across was a little shack that she would get her visa stamped to continue into East Berlin. I came over 20 minutes later, which probably seemed like an eternity for my wife. I was directed that halfway across, I'd be met by an East German guard standing behind a chain link gate with his AK-47 at port arms. I was supposed to continue on, push my arm into him, no eye-to-eye contact, but look beyond him, to push him out of the way so I could enter into East Berlin, communist territory. And sure enough, he backed away. Meanwhile, I see my wife standing over there, another 75 yards, with her hands on her hips, with smoke coming out of her ears. Honey, smile for the cameras. Okay, so we were on a psychological mission, because after we visited some of the shops, which were barren, nothing on display, we were asked to go to the most classy hotel in East Berlin. Everything else was gray. But you go into this hotel, there's colors, it looks like something you'd see in Western Europe. But it was packed with all the political elite. So we went to a table. You could have heard a pin drop in that hotel. My wife and I ordered some coffee and a dessert, and we're telling corny jokes and laughing at it. The whole time, eyes were on us. How dare these Americans come into our territory, unarmed, escorted. And it's like this is their home. We were sending a message that we were not afraid of communism. And so I know Pastor Gary spent time over there during that time going into communist territory behind enemy lines. And so if you haven't heard the story, you get a chance, have him tell you about their story when they were on missionary work in that part of the country. Okay, with that as an introduction, let me follow up here with what I'm supposed to be talking about. Okay, this radical ideology we're talking about can best be summarized in the words critical race theory. Now, critical race theory is an iteration of critical theory that came about in the 1930s through the Frankfurt School, and we'll talk about that here in a second. So it went from critical theory to critical legal theory and then critical race theory. The individuals that were part of this were with the Frankfurt School, and I'll get to that in a second. So 7 July 2020, a friend of mine contacted me and asked if I'd seen this video that the Air Force Academy football coaches had put out. I hadn't. So I went to the electronic version of the newspaper. It was on the front page, and I was shocked by what I saw. I'm going to play the video for you.
We are the Boat Brotherhood. One team, one family.
We are a diverse team.
As Falcons in our team huddle, the goal is to score.
but we will serve to reach beyond the playing field.
To build communities and our country.
To support all backgrounds, black, brown, and white.
To pursue greater opportunities.
When it comes to education, justice, healthcare, and peace,
so we may all win in life.
our mission extends beyond winning.
Our mission is to stand against racism.
To promote diversity and inclusion.
Our mission is to demonstrate
And fight for respect and human dignity. We aim to tell our country and the world that Black Lives Matter.
And to cure the disease of discrimination
And racism in our country.
Black lives have not been
and are not treated as equal in our society.
Racial profiling,
Jim Crow.
Mass incarceration.
redlining.
Police brutality.
from the Bolt Brotherhood, enough is enough. This is not a political choice of Marxism or capitalism.
This is the basic regard and respect for human life and dignity.
This is why Black Lives Matter.
If the intent of our country is justice and liberty for all.
We must first acknowledge that Black lives matter.
We must stand in unity for racism to end.
We stand in unity to be part of the solution.
It's not enough for us to be not racist.
It's time to be anti-racist.
It's time to be anti-racist.
It's time to be anti-racist.
It's time for me to recognize my bias.
It's time to use
My voice.
My talent.
My platform.
To stand against unjust police brutality.
And institutional discrimination.
take action, take responsibility, and take a stance.
Listen to understand.
Listen with an open heart.
Listen to our experiences.
And empathize with the pain that racism causes so many.
Educate yourself on the role that race plays in our history.
We will fight for fair treatment.
Justice and equality of Black Americans.
Brown Americans and all Americans.
This goes beyond the football field.
Because Black Lives Matter.
Because Black lives matter.
Because Black lives matter.
It's time to open our eyes.
It's time to open our eyes.
And to fight and serve for justice.
It's time to make our country and our world a better place.
It's bigger than football.
It's bigger than football.
It's bigger than football.
There's no neutral nor in between when it comes to racism.
You have to take a stance.
Because the Bolt Brotherhood believes Black Lives Matter.
I know some of these men. They're decent men. But somehow they were duped by this movement, this Black Lives Matter movement. Because remember, 2 months before that happened, George Floyd had his incident there in Minneapolis. So this really concerned me. So I wrote a blog article, and 2 days later, a good friend of mine calls me and asked if he could send that blog article to the superintendent at the Air Force Academy, which he did. And all night, my phone was buzzing with emails going back and forth. 4-star generals involved in the email exchanges. So we found something that was pretty significant. Okay, so in June of 2021, the Secretary of Defense before Congress testified that they were not teaching critical race theory. A month later, a professor published an article in the Washington Post, and here was the headline. I'm a professor at a U.S. military academy. Here's why I teach critical race theory. So she defied the Secretary of Defense and said, nope, you're wrong. We are teaching critical race theory. And in the article, she said, and for good reason. Okay, so about that time, we're picking up anecdotes from cadets, just to really demonstrate that this video was not a one-off. I mean, this was just some crazy football coaches sending a bad message. So we learned that a female instructor called Air Force Academy males white boy 1, white boy 2, white boy 3. Then we learned that cadets had this attitude called 5 and dive. that once they graduated, they were going to serve 5 years and get out. They had no intention of serving our nation, even though the taxpayers spent $450,000 providing this cadet with a Bachelor of Science and the expectation that they would move on and serve their nation as an officer. Then there's a potential honor code violation, where you have a male Air Force officer or professor that thinks he's a woman and expects cadets to address him as she or her or whatever. So this really conflicted cadets. Boy, they're asking me to do something dishonest. Then there was this political rant from this Air Force retired lieutenant colonel, now a professor at the academy, in front of cadets, goes into a 10-minute tirade saying things like F Trump, F Hegseth, I'm going to fight this effing SHIT. We're not going to put up with this effing SHIT. Maybe I'll resign. So for 10 minutes. Now, had he been on active duty, that would have been a court-martial offense. But a lot of people also argue that because we have retirement pay, I have retirement pay from the Department of Defense, that I am still subject to the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Then we had the Purple Cords, and these were cadets that were trained to be diversity and inclusion officers throughout all the units, all 40 squadrons, 4 groups, and the wing. 90 cadets, male and female 20, 21-year-old cadets that wore a purple rope over the left shoulder, signifying that they were the diversity and inclusion officer in that unit. And then finally, there was viewpoint discrimination, where a Naval Academy midshipman was going to be discharged from the Navy with, 2 or 3 months before graduation. And Mike Rose got involved in that case. So they had convinced the Secretary of the Navy that what they were trying to do was wrong. And it all had to do with his supporting his mom and dad, police officers in Los Angeles, who had to deal with all these BLM and Antifa riots that were taking place. He was sympathetic regarding their safety. Other midshipmen then repeated social media posts he was publishing, calling him a racist and whatever. And the leadership at the Naval Academy was going to kick him out for alleged racism. So the founding of STARRS was based on some of these early indicators that we've got a cancer growing within the Department of Defense. We applied for 501c3 status and got that awarded in April of 2021 with the title, Stand Together Against Racism and Radicalism in the Services. So what is radicalism? We use a definition published by Michigan State University. Now they have a radicalism archive there. So it's obviously obvious that they would promote a definition. And so the definition that they use and we adopted, the beliefs or actions of individuals, groups, or organizations who advocate for social and or political reform to achieve an alternative vision of society. So that suggests that there is an original vision. And so this word and this definition came into play because STARRS was pulled into the COVID-19 vaccine debacle. Because in the end, after we learned what was going on, we realized this was a radical effort. Okay, so the two visions, the original vision, which is the American Creed, and now this alternative vision that we're dealing with today, that's essentially called cultural Marxism. So, what's critical to understand at this point is that there's a fundamental difference between education and ideology. Education relates to knowledge, representing the intersection between truth and beliefs. Ideology, on the other hand, is based on sentiment, feelings about beliefs which can be true or false. But most importantly, they tend to be prescriptive. You must adopt this view. And if you don't, not only are you wrong, but you're immoral. And you should be punished. And we see that all the time. Mike is working cases where individuals are being punished because they defied this whole thing about DEI. So the distinction is what versus what arguably should be. Okay, so education played an important role in bringing American citizens up to understanding their obligations based on our American creed. E pluribus unum, from many one. And this DEI stuff does just the opposite. It's from one many. And so the approach to educating Americans on this whole notion of e pluribus unum promoted stable families and communities living lives based on purpose, grounded in our Judeo-Christian tradition, and manifested in a wholesome sense of duty and accountability. And an example of where we have fallen short on that, a good friend of ours, he's on our advisory board, Kendall Qualls, stood up, take charge, right after the George Floyd incident. And so their whole purpose in that mission is to take charge of your life and your circumstances. Don't be dependent upon the government. And one of the statistics that he uses often is that before LBJ came into office with his Great Society initiatives, 80% of black families were intact, with a mother and a father. 80%. Today, it's less than 20%. And so a lot of that has stemmed from this whole Marxist ideology that has permeated our society. So cultural Marxism is manifested through this concept of critical race theory and its praxis called diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's fully intended to divide Americans into oppressor and oppressed classes. And so we've traced this, and a lot of people have done it. I know George has in his book. So the historical roots of critical race theory and cultural Marxism for us, for America, dates back as far as 1843. And so in the archives, there's a letter from Karl Marx to Arnold Ruge talking about critical philosophy, to go ahead and critique traditions and values that people have adopted up until that point in time. They go so far as to say it's important for people to confess that they should no longer subscribe to or embrace the traditions and values that they had inherited up to that point, to obtain forgiveness for its sins. So 5 years later, we all know about the Communist Manifesto. So that came out in 1848, 13 years before the American Civil War. So it's been alive and percolating in America for quite some time. Okay, now enter Woodrow Wilson in the early 1900s. Wilson pushed an administrative state. He didn't think elected officials really knew what they were doing. And so we need unelected technocrats in government positions to tell us how we should live our lives. And so that provided a lot of the political conditions to allow critical race theory to truly manifest in the American social fabric. Okay, a couple of other key points here. The Frankfurt School. This was in the 1930s. These were scholars that came to America from Germany. Hitler was rising in power. And the big political contest in Germany at the time was between communists and fascists. And so fascists were to the right of communists, not to the right of the political center. A lot of people don't understand that. Fascism is not a political right manifestation. It's a sibling of communism that flows under Marxist socialism. Okay, so they come to the United States. They take up residence at Columbia University in New York. And Bella Dodd here in her memoir, School of Darkness, talks about when she was at Hunter College across town from Columbia, that some of her fellow teachers are saying, hey, Bella, you know, they're offering free courses over at Columbia. Well, this is the Frankfurt School at Columbia. Adorno, Horkheimer, Marcuse, Erich Fromm, they had about 5 or 6 very prominent scholars that were part of the Frankfurt School at Columbia University. And so Bella, in her memoir, talks about this whole thing was based on this notion of social justice, and that there was social injustice, therefore we need to remedy that. It was Marxism was what they were talking about. You've got oppressors that are imposing social injustice, so they need people like us to go in and level the playing field. And one of the areas that they penetrated are unions, especially teachers' unions. Okay, so Herbert Marcuse, I mentioned his name. He stayed in America while his colleagues went back to Germany. And so around the 1960s, he takes a teaching position at the University of California at San Diego, so not far from here. You've probably heard of Angela Davis. She was one of his prized students. Marcuse's advanced critical theory in different ways, such as a critique of pure tolerance. So many of you, if you've taken philosophy courses, Immanuel Kant wrote a book, A Critique of Pure Reason. And so Marcuse and a couple authors come out, a critique of pure tolerance. And the whole point was, if the views are coming from the left, Marxist, then they should be tolerated. If they're not, like they're coming from the right, then they should not be tolerated. But another book that he wrote with the title Eros and Civilization was sort of the Bible and the inspiration for the radical feminist movement in America in the 1960s. Okay, that morphed into critical legal studies in the 1970s. And here's a chart that kind of maps out what happened. The four key areas were feminism, race and law, postmodernism, and economic law theory. This stuff is still being taught in today's law schools. If you talk to a lot of recent law school graduates, they'll tell you, yeah, we learn all about racial justice, economic justice, and whatever. And it stems from critical theory. Here's a screenshot from the 1960s about words Marxists use to accuse others in order to shut them down. Do they look familiar? This is in the 1960s. Fascist, Nazi, extremist. So what America experienced these past 4 years is not new, nor is it organic. So here are some charts that Take Charge put together, Kendall Qualls and his folks in Minneapolis. So what they did, they took a look at words that are being used in articles and how often they're mentioned. So you can see this slide, it's pretty flat up until 2012, about the time that Barack Obama is moving into his second term. And look at the spike, the significant increase in the use of these terms. So upper left, systemic racism. Upper right, unconscious bias. Middle left, white privilege. Middle right, white supremacy. Bottom left, diversity and inclusion. And then bottom right, whiteness. So the evidence is there. And so they were changing our language and changing the way we saw and understood the world. And then here's another chart from Take Charge. The red and blue lines indicate sentiment about race relations, and they were pretty healthy in 2001 to about 2011, and then they started to drop off. The yellow bars indicate the number of diversity officers that were being employed in organizations across America, and look how they're ramping up. Okay, so all this really was designed to create and exploit racial grievances to cause division, which they hoped would destroy America. So now I want to show a video. It's overwhelming. It provides a lot of evidence of what we're doing. So in the end, you're going to see words scrolling down the slide. Those are headlines in articles that have been published. So bear with me, it's 8 minutes.
Your mission remains fixed, determined, inviolable. It is to win our war. Everything else in your professional career is but corollary to this vital dedication. That in war there is no substitute for victory. That if you lose, the nation will be destroyed. That the very obsession of your public service must be duty, honor, country.
That was put together by our webmaster, Cindy Quitchoff, 16 years with the CIA and working in counter-espionage. I don't think she was involved in propaganda type stuff. Let me share just a little bit more evidence with you before I hand this off to my colleague, Mike. The Military Leadership Diversity Commission was chartered in the National Defense Authorization Act in the fall of 2008 without any debate. So this commission was established to discriminate. I'll be blunt. Now the title is From Representation to Inclusion. And again, remember we mentioned there's a big difference between assimilation and inclusion. So in one of their issue papers, they talked about how minorities were overrepresented within our enlisted ranks, but they were underrepresented within the general officer ranks. So they wanted to correct that. And the only way you can correct that is through discrimination. So here are specific words in their final report in March of 2011. I just want to emphasize some of the points here. They said diversity management calls for creating a culture of inclusion. Creating this culture will involve changing the way in which people relate to one another. Can you imagine that? So we're not going to have a choice to be ourselves and to relate to other people based on your own individual autonomous personalities. And this is within a single unit, within a particular military branch, and throughout the entire Department of Defense. In particular, although good diversity management rests on a foundation of fair treatment, it is not about treating everyone the same, i.e., this is where they have the license to discriminate. This can be a difficult concept to grasp, especially for leaders who grew up with the equal opportunity inspired mandate to be both color and gender blind. No, you can't be colorblind. You have to be color conscious. And you're going to see that expression again a little bit later when Mike comes back up. Blindness to difference, however, can lead to a culture of assimilation in which differences are suppressed rather than leveraged. Again, assimilation is bad because we have to promote subcultural differences, and that was their charter. Okay, so 5 months later, the president issues an executive order establishing diversity and inclusion personnel and programs across the entire federal government. They demonstrated they could do it and get away with it in the Department of Defense. And once they had done it, now it's time to fully deploy it. And that's why we call the DEI a praxis. It's a way of implementing and operationalizing concepts and theories and whatever. So President Trump, once he figured out what was happening, in September of 2020, issued an executive order to cease and desist all this diversity, equity, inclusion stuff. And this is where Matt Lohmeyer comes into play. Okay, so then when President Biden came into office, he rescinded President Trump's executive order and issued 3 more, doubling down on the diversity and inclusion business. Okay, so in December of 2023, we learned about this new group called DACODI, the Defense Advisory Committee on Diversity and Inclusion. And it was chaired by the same individual who chaired the Military Leadership Diversity Commission, a retired black 4-star general. Wonderful gentleman, a true gentleman, but he drank the Kool-Aid. He really bought into this whole notion of critical race theory. And so we attended their December session, December of 2023. That was Cynthia Quitchoff, our webmaster, attended that session. She was the only one from the general public attending that session. And so she offered some observations from that session. And I'll let you read these, but the one I really want to point out was they kept emphasizing the need to establish diversity competence within its officers. And this required intensive DEI training, indoctrination. And if you go to our website, we've got a lot of material on that website about DACODI, if you want to learn a lot more about it. Okay, so then President Trump rescinded Biden's executive orders. This was day one, January 20. He issued these 3 executive orders to, again, do away with diversity, equity, and inclusion. The problem, however, is that we've seen how Obama did his thing, and then Trump, and then Biden, and now Trump, going back and forth like ping pong. So we're working with Congress right now to codify these policy changes. Otherwise, it will never end. So I want to wrap up my part by saying that, some of the material that you picked up as you came in are hopefully useful. So if you meet with other people, this one brochure, DEI Marxist Roots and Impacts on the Military, summarizes it all on one page. So hopefully you find that useful and can use it. And the other tool we have is this slide that really shows that Marxism in America has been a Trojan horse. And they have brought that Trojan horse into play by using nice-sounding words like diversity, equity, and inclusion. And if you don't think much about it or know much about what's going on there, they do sound nice. I mean, what's wrong with diversity? The problem is it creates distrust, disunity, division, and conflict. And we saw that with our recruiting numbers, our retention numbers. And as recently as the recent election, you saw a big turnaround in recruiting. They were now meeting their recruiting goals because now the word is out. We're doing away with this ideological stuff. So with that, I'm going to invite my colleague, Mike, to come up and introduce you to STARRS.
I get emotional whenever I see the video you just saw, and even more so the one you're going to see in a few minutes. Now, I happen to know that Ron Scott turned down admission to 2 Ivy League schools, including with a scholarship, and a baseball scholarship to Notre Dame to go to the Air Force Academy. And the academies during our era were filled with cadets, all the academies, and there's 5 of them, selected based on merit in that manner. And we can prove that admission to those schools and advancement to the schools have changed the criteria to put the color of the applicants and the gender as the primary criteria in order to get forced quotas. Now, I'm going to tell you for a moment about a young man from Los Angeles that Ron spoke about earlier. This gentleman turned down admission to the Massachusetts Institute of Pathology to go to the Naval Academy. He was already a pilot before he entered the Naval Academy. His parents worked for the Los Angeles Police Department as police officers, and his father was a pilot for the Los Angeles Police Department. He was home on leave in Los Angeles when riots were occurring and his parents were out fighting the riots. And he saw on social media criticisms of the police and praises of Antifa and Black Lives Matter that were doing the rioting. So he texted back defense of the police and criticisms of Black Lives Matter and Antifa. He didn't say he was in the military. He was home on his sofa in Los Angeles, but Naval Academy found out about it. Now they're going to throw him out. Now, the Naval Academy didn't eventually let him graduate and go to pilot training because we lawyers persuaded the Naval Academy to do that. A federal judge did. And at the last minute, when we informed the federal judge that the Naval Academy was going to let him graduate. That same day, got the lawyers on the phone and said, I'm very glad you settled this case because my opinion is already more than 100 pages long. And the Naval Academy knew they were going to be ruled against. And why would they be ruled against? I'll tell you why. On the court records showed that other Naval Academy shipmen were on social media criticizing the police and praising Antifa and Black Lives Matter and saying things like F Trump, I hope Louisville burns. And the Commandant of Cadets, the #2 officer at the Naval Academy, in uniform, was on his daughter's Facebook page in which she said the same thing. So now you got a naval officer who's, so in other words, it's okay to criticize Trump and criticize the police. You can stay at the Naval Academy, but we're going to throw this gentleman out for essentially defending his parents. So that's viewpoint discrimination. It's unconstitutional. Now, when Ron and I and a handful of others saw this Black Lives Matter video by coaches at the Air Force Academy, even though we're in different states, we immediately recognized that, hey, that's the government, that's the military being political. We're not supposed to be political. But these are football coaches teaching impressionable 17, 18-year-olds to praise Black Lives Matter when they're out rioting, burning our cities down. And you can go to the website and see they're against the American creed. They're against nuclear families, for example. They want to destroy them. And not only that, some of what these coaches were saying was false. We don't have Jim Crow laws in the present tense. We haven't had those in 50 years, for example, and there are other examples like that. So the more we got into this, we recognized the danger. When we went to the Air Force Academy, we loved the fact that we came from different backgrounds, but it didn't matter our background, because now we're going to be judged on merit, based on what we could do. And as long as we were on the same team to work to defend our country, then we were going to be able to have a satisfying purpose in life and helping to preserve our American creed and be judged based on what we could do, not other skin color. So I'm going to talk about what we did once when we formed STARRS. Started in July 2020 when we saw the football video, and then got the resistance to taking it down. So the superintendent, who was outgoing, issued a letter claiming that there was systemic racism at the Air Force Academy, which we don't think was correct. Gee, all these years there's been systemic racism at the Air Force Academy and nobody noticed it? And by the way, you've been superintendent for 3 years. What did you do about it? So now while you're going out the door in 60 days, you're going to commission a study and a report explaining systemic racism at the Air Force Academy. So we filed a Freedom of Information Act request to get that report. 2 years later, we still didn't have it. So we got Judicial Watch to file a lawsuit, and we got the report, but about half of it's redacted. Now we're going to get our local congressman to get the unredacted report and give it to us. We think it's just a bunch of ideological baloney. STARRS has filed over 60 Freedom of Information Act requests. We've had 3 lawsuits, 2 of them successful, another one pending that Judicial Watch brought for us. And we initially started out opposing racism, meaning reverse racism, mainly in the military. But when the COVID vaccine mandate came out and we saw how, number one, it's probably illegal. You don't think the military can issue a vaccine mandate that's illegal? Well, the federal court shut down the anthrax vaccine mandate by the federal government after punishing thousands of people who didn't take it and making thousands of people take it. Gee, it's illegal. Same thing has happened. We filed a federal lawsuit, STARRS. 3 attorneys, I'm one of them, to challenge in federal court the legality of the COVID vaccine mandate. At least 8 federal court decisions ruled that denying military members an exemption from taking the COVID vaccine because of their religious beliefs was illegal. So again, how do we have the military being run by officers sworn to uphold the Constitution, obey the law, violating the law and causing all this damage to people? So we expanded in STARRS our mission beyond fighting racism to fighting radical ideologies as we grew to understand more and more the severity of this and the nature of this. STARRS has outstanding leadership. It has 9 general officers or admirals. It has 8 colonels, or the Navy equivalent is captain, 8 lieutenant colonels, 2 majors, a Medal of Honor recipient, a Chief Master Sergeant, top enlisted person in the Air Force, and 3 senior former Pentagon officials. And we keep growing. STARRS has 8 officers, one of whom is Matthew Lohmeyer, who President Trump has nominated to become the Undersecretary of the Air Force, and on May the 7th will be his Senate hearings for his confirmation, and if he is confirmed, which we hope and expect we will, he'll be the number 2 person in the Air Force. Now, to understand the significance of this, Matthew Lohmeyer was fired as a squadron commander, lieutenant colonel, for having written a book about Marxism in the military called Irresistible Revolution. That's the only book I've read twice. And having talked about it on a podcast, he has gone from a lieutenant colonel in a little less than 5 years. He will have gone to being the number 2 person in the Air Force, outranking the 4-star generals in charge of the Air Force. So this is not only unprecedented, but remarkable. He and Pete Hegsteff will be working very closely together. So we have 33 members of our board of advisors, 10 directors, one of whom is with us tonight, Martha Ostrom, 152 volunteers across the country. We have 25 state leaders, and we're constantly expanding and seeking to expand. Almost 4,000 on our free mailing list. If you go to our STARRS website, you can sign up for our weekly newsletter. We collaborate with at least a dozen organizations, including a group of West Point graduates and a group of Naval Academy graduates. Here are some of the things STARRS has done. We have over 2,600 posts on our website of examples of CRT, DEI wokeness in the military. We've had 49 open letters, 59, over 60 FOIAs by now, over 160 media appearances, 33 podcasts, 46 press releases. I know there's more than this, 46 press releases, weekly newsletters, and we got videos, we got statements submitted to Congress, submitted to DACADI. We've had 2 delegations go to Congress, one in 2024 and in 2025, Lieutenant General, 3-star General Rod Bishop and I for STARRS, plus 2 West Point graduates for the MacArthur Society and 2 Naval Academy graduates, went to at least 25 congressional offices in the first 5 business days of February. We were very well received. We went to dinner with the Freedom Caucus members in the House, and they knew about STARRS. They agreed with us that the executive orders that President Trump had administered, abolishing DEI and so forth, and giving relief to the COVID vaccine, people that were harmed by the COVID vaccine mandate. We want to codify those into statute so that they'll be permanent and difficult to undo if you wind up someday getting a Democrat president. Matthew Lohmeyer testified before a House Subcommittee on National Security, the Border, and Foreign Affairs in January 2024 about the risk of progressive ideologies in the U.S. military. And to illustrate, I would say, our effectiveness, the Congressman Grothman from Wisconsin, who has invited Matthew Lohmeyer to do this testimony, he was chairman of this subcommittee, had General Bishop and me and a West Point graduate meet with him for about an hour. And when that was over, I walked up to the congressman and gave him my card, and he gave me his card, and he wrote his cell phone number on the back. And he said, call me anytime you guys are in town or if you need anything. Can you guys go to dinner with me tonight? Your chairman is the best I've ever seen. So I said, okay, where do you want to go? Now you select where you want to go, and then let me know by text, which I did. So we're going to go to the steakhouse. Then he texted me and says, do you mind if I bring another congressman with me? No, we don't mind at all. So now we're going to, three of us, to dinner at a steakhouse with a congressman from Wisconsin, and then a congressman from Montana, who is a former Navy SEAL, Zinke. I could repeat this story over and over and over and over. So we have established STARRS over next summer, a 5-year period, relationships with people at high levels in Congress and in the media and multiple organizations that are all working in the same direction that we are. We published, you'll see in the middle, a booklet. We published a position papers on this list of topics about the boards of visitors, national defense reform. We're trying to create what's called a Duty Honor Country Commission to take a deep dive on examining how to restore the service academies to the meritocracies that they used to be, for example. And we have submitted 10 pieces of legislation at the request of the congressman, 2 congressmen on the Senate and House side, for them to introduce in the National Defense Authorization Act, and sometimes in standalone legislation. The most complicated and important of this probably is a commission to study how it is that the military imposed an anthrax vaccine mandate and a COVID vaccine mandate illegally and harmed all these people and decimated the military ranks in the meantime by throwing out thousands of people who were right. And by the way, it's not just us saying they're right. You've got President Trump has issued an executive order saying that the COVID vaccine mandate was unfair and improper. And now Pete Hegseth, Secretary of Defense, just last week, issued in writing and said in a press conference it was unlawful and apologized for it. So that's the official position of the Department of Defense and the President now. We have been very active with legal initiatives through STARRS. We've advised hundreds of current and former military members. We filed a lawsuit challenging the legality of the COVID vaccine mandate, as I said. We filed another lawsuit challenging the legality of the Biden administration shutting down or suspending the Academy Board of Visitors. So when I heard that, I said, well, how is it that the executive branch can shut down an oversight board over the academies created by Congress? They can't do that. And within 10 days of us filing the lawsuit, the boards of visitors of West Point Naval Academy, Air Force Academy were unsuspended. So evidently the Justice Department lawyer read our complaint and agreed with it. But then Biden fired all the Trump appointees. Now, under the statutes, the appointments are supposed to be for staggered terms for 4-year periods, and it says non-political. But Biden introduced for the first time, because it never happened before, just firing all the people that the other president had appointed. And if there's any doubt that this was in order to advance leftist ideology, Jen Psaki, who was a press secretary, said publicly, oh yeah, the reason the president fired him is because the Trump appointees don't represent our values. Okay? That's right. And the Department of Defense did a third thing, which I'll just skip over the details, to basically neuter the effectiveness, undermine the effectiveness of the oversight function of the boards of visitors of the academies. Now, we have a STARRS advisor who's a retired brigadier general, graduate of the Air Force Academy, named Chris Walker, and he's black. And he was assigned to the Pentagon to work in the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Department. What they hadn't counted on is that he was against it. And he didn't tell them he was against it. He just gathered all the information. So he testified in federal court against the Naval Academy's claim that using race for admission criteria was okay. He testified as an expert recognized by the court against that. I might add that 5 Air Force Academy graduates were recently elected to the board of directors of the Air Force Academy Alumni Association. This Chris Walker was one of them. And they ran successfully on the board of directors because of the support that the old board of directors had given for DEI, supporting the academy policies for DEI, but then they wouldn't publish the opposition, the rebuttals, the reasons to oppose it. So, so that's another initiative that STARRS helped initiate and bring to successful conclusion. We filed in the Supreme Court a petition for what's called a petition for writ of certiorari, an appeal to the District Columbia Circuit Court of Appeals, dozens of FOIA requests, and now what we're doing is we're hoping that when Matt Lohmeyer and some others get approved, that we're going to be able to get immediate relief or quicker relief for people who have been harmed by the COVID vaccine, but punished for not taking a COVID vaccine. But also, we have a category of people who are being punished. Like when I say punished, they'll say, we have a complaint that you're said something that's toxic and created the toxic environment, and we're going to remove you from command. And why don't you just go home and sit there? I have a captain's been for 6 months doing nothing. He had got a bunch of awards for being one of the top officers in the Office of Special Investigation. But then he got on a promotion board that he was ordered to be on, and he started complaining, why are we promoting person A instead of person B when B is clearly more qualified? Well, it came down to race. Now, once they knew that he was against DEI, then they turned on him. And we're trying to rescue some of these people before they're being thrown out. And I hope Matthew Lohmeyer will, I think he's going to be in charge of all the personnel matters of the Air Force. So he can just order that, their attempted expulsions be suspended while it's further investigated. Lieutenant General Rod Bishop, our chairman of the board, was a member of the Heritage Foundation's National Independent Panel on Military Service and Readiness. That's a big deal. It was Congressman Michael Waltz, who is now President Trump's intelligence advisor, was on that panel and asked General Bishop, our board chairman, to be on this panel. STARRS Executive Vice President Matt Lohmeyer is at this moment a executive vice president of STARRS, as I am. He was a member of the Arizona State University's National Commission on Civic Education in the Military. Army Major General Joe Arbuckle, who is our vice chairman of STARRS, he created and leads Flag Officers of America. And he obtained signatures of 185 retired generals and admirals on a letter to address House leadership asking them to remove DEI from the National Defense Authorization Bill last year. He also obtained 130 retired generals and admirals on a letter supporting Pete Hegseth to be the next Secretary of Defense. So you can see kind of the depth of the influence that we've been able to grow over time. We've had probably a dozen town halls by now. STARRS has given many speeches as we're doing this, and we're videoing this. So we hope that you can wind up duplicating this by emailing to others a link to this talk, or giving the talk yourself, or inviting us or others from STARRS to come give the talk, and so forth. We had our first rally last September in Arizona with 5 speakers, and we're planning another rally in Texas in 2025. These links give a list of accomplishments of STARRS in 2023 and 2024. Let me make some observations. Here's the bottom line takeaway from this. The older generations, my father, my grandparents, they experienced in Korea, Vietnam, the Cold War, China, Cuba, Berlin Wall, all that came from Marxist ideologies, which they fought against. Over 95,000 American military personnel died fighting Marxism. And that is small in comparison to the greater toll. Look in the middle there, the death toll from communism. 65 million in China died, 20 million from the Soviet Union, 2 million in Cambodia, 2 million in North Korea, 1.7 million in Africa, 1.5 million in Afghanistan, and so on. You see the difference between North Korea and South Korea? South Korea's got capitalism. If you fly over at night, satellite at night, there's lights throughout South Korea. It's dark, North Korea. Those people are living in misery and squalor, and because of 2 different socioeconomic, political systems. Okay. Now, I remember in high school in the 60s reading Masters of the Seat by J. Edgar Hoover, who was then the head of the FBI. And I understood then that the Marxist ideology, the communists, were infiltrating our institutions, taking them over. They were doing it through higher education, and they were doing it through labor unions. Now, when I gave this talk about a month ago in South Carolina, at the point that I said in taking over labor unions, this is on a video now, somebody in the audience stood up and started screaming. He was a Democrat. He started screaming at us that labor unions were good and that they had nothing to do with communists and we shouldn't be talking about this, and then he stormed out. So that told me that I was probably over the target correctly. But what's important to understand, and we'll see this in some other slides, is this is not a new phenomenon. This is just the latest iteration of what started 100 years ago. So the Marxist ideological infiltration has affected K through 12, universities, and now all our government institutions. And the phrase that sort of captures this is the long march through the institutions. This is derived from Antonio Gramsci, and I'm going to read what he said in 1915. Now, this is all written, so we don't have to guess as what their intentions were. Socialism is precisely the religion that must overwhelm Christianity. Now, let that sink in. In the new order, socialism will triumph by first capturing the culture via infiltration of schools, universities, churches, and the media by transforming the consciousness of society. That is what is happening. That is the aim, transforming the consciousness of society with the younger people that don't know about our American creed. Tens of thousands of people have been trained in DEI in billions spent for training of salaries. For example, the University of Michigan, which is about as woke as you can get, as of January 2024, employed over 500 DEI personnel, costing $30 million annually. DOGE Commission canceled $370 million in Department of Education DEI grants. Do you like your tax dollars going to the Department of Education DEI grants? I don't. Now, here's what STARRS is going to do in the future. See, we started out, our mission was to educate. And now we're converting to like being a sentinel or a watchdog. We know that DEI has been outlawed, it's been banned, but it's not gone. And we receive on an ongoing basis information, which then we pass on to powers that be, about DEI and its adverse effects so that we can squash it. We're going to monitor, propose, educate about policy and legislation to sustain these cultural changes that are being stated in the executive orders, but now we got to implement them. Emphasize education as an antidote to ideology and remedy damages caused by these DEI ideologies. What we ask and encourage you to do is go to our STARRS website. I'm truly amazed at the caliber of it, thanks to our former CIA agent, Cindy Witchcomb, and sign up for our free mailing newsletter, which will be sent to you weekly. And I'd be remiss if I did not invite you, ask you to make a tax-deductible donation to help support our mission, which you can do at the website. Now, I'm going to show you this video in conclusion. And I'm sure it does the same thing with Ron, because you'll see in here, well, you'll see the connection with us. And like I said, it's emotional because, yes, we were scared. So here we go. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we want to have a question and answer session here. And Ron and I will answer your question. Who's first? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you guys to come up to the mic too. Out of the... Hold on. For posterity's sake, gentlemen, you can scoot a little bit over.
Kind of come on.
Ready?
Yes, out of the about 8,000 that were drummed out of the different branches for not taking the COVID vaccine, do you know at this point how many have returned?
Very few. And I think Ron may know the number. I think I heard him say it. But let me just point out that that's 8,500 that were forced out. There's an estimated 50,000 who just left because they saw the writing on the wall. They weren't going to wait around to be forced out.
Right. They didn't re-up.
About 150 have returned.
That's terrible.
The challenge is once they left with a general discharge condition and they were able to get employment, 2 or 3 years later now they're invited to come back into the military. I'm not sure I would be interested in coming back. So they had deflated them in that whole process.
Okay. One other statement, and you can maybe explain why. I was listening to Victor Davis Hanson, and he said he taught a course at the Naval Academy around 2004, I believe. And he said of the hundreds of universities that he had lectured at, even back in 2004, the U.S. Naval Academy was the most hard left of any of the places he had been at. And he said he vowed never to teach there at any of the academies again because he said he got such a cold shoulder there. Is that what, even back in 2004, how are the academies so hard left?
Well, some think there's a correlation between the civilian instructors as opposed to military instructors and this wokeism. Naval Academy clearly had the most civilian instructors and the earliest. Now, when Ron and I were cadets, all of our instructors, except maybe one, were military officers that had had operational experience. They got PhDs, most of them, some master's degrees, but they were role models. We just saw daily officers who had been out in combat or been in military service. Now what you get are civilians who, let's say they graduated from Cornell, which I know some did. They took the DEI courses there, and now they infect this leftist ideology in the school. For example, can you imagine telling on the first day of class, your 15 students stand up and say, I'm going to call your names now. Now, the people of color, she'll say, okay, you're Cadet Smith, you're Cadet Brown, and then point to a white boy and say, I'm going to call you white boy 2. And you're white boy 1 because you're taller, and you're white boy 3. All you white boys look alike to me. I mean, this is so shocking. This is the kind of stuff that motivates us to stop this out. So civilian instructors is probably the source of the Naval Academy wokeism. And let me say this one other thing. So we saw in this federal court case and put on the record that Naval Academy midshipmen and officers were saying in social media leftist support of Antifa and Black Lives Matter, and they're rioting and criticizing the police. And that was shocking. So it was definitely infected. So anyway, Ron, anything to add to that?
Not much, Mike. I was curious. I saw that interview or that broadcast by Victor Davis Hanson. The only thing I can infer from all that is that when Herbert Marcuse really started to ramp up critical race theory at University of California, San Diego, that was in the 1960s. In the 1970s, we were coming back from Vietnam. There was huge social upheaval because people were very anti-Vietnam, a lot of anti-America. So within about 20 or 30 years, we started to see that manifest in universities across the United States, to include the Naval Academy. But that's the best I can answer from what little I know about what actually happened, so.
Yes, sir.
What's your relationship with certain congressmen in this area that portray themselves as staunch conservatives, such as Darrell Issa and Jerry Obernolte? And what can we do as constituents, their constituents, to improve your relationship with them?
All right, I'll answer this two ways. I'm not aware of having a relationship with any congressman around here. Now, there's over 500 of them, and we focused on certain ones that we thought would be receptive, and our committee chairman and so forth. But I want to talk about what you can do. So I was a senator, state senator, 13 years, so I know how this could work. You're writing, calling, complaining, writing letters to the editor can greatly influence people in elected positions. And almost paranoidally, they will be more fearful of some of this than is really warranted, because they don't know how big a crowd you got. So what you do is you agitate, you communicate. But what we hope we're doing with these talks here is to see you're not doing it for us, you're doing it for yourself and posterity, for your grandchildren, for your great-grandchildren. Because like Lincoln said, we can lose this constitutional republic. And historically, all the constitutional republics, like in Rome, have been ended. So just do what you can. All politics is local, but you influence others and band together and communicate. Let me just say this. We have a motto in STARRS. We say, engage, engage, engage. That's what you got to do. Engage, engage, engage. And don't put off till tomorrow what you can do today, because one thing leads to another.
There's a lot of potential here in California. I mean, we've been here 3 days, and in those 3 days, what we've discovered is there's tremendous energy already developing here in California. I mean, people like John Leonard, David Marco, your pastor, Gary. Thursday, a tremendous privilege to be on your radio program with Christine Reagan. You've got a voice, you've got an audience, and what we're discovering is that when more people learn that we're dealing with a pretty serious issue here in America, it's not going to get solved unless we step forward and offer to do something about it, which I appreciate your willingness to get engaged. And so we're hoping to come back. John and David already are dropping hints that they want us to come back and start addressing other chapters of the California Republican Assembly, and we look forward to doing that. But as Mike mentioned earlier, this is not a copyrighted presentation. So if what you saw you liked, you want to present it to groups that you're with and whatever, we encourage you to do that and personalize it. I mean, you don't have to necessarily present what we have here, but we're on the frontier right now, I think, of turning California back to a red state, like Colorado. So anyway, thanks for your interest and get involved.
All right, I have a question for you. During the 1950s, we had the Red Scare, and there was actually the Communist Control Act of 1954 that was passed into law but was struck down over the years because of its supposed unconstitutionality. Do you advocate any kind of loyalty oath or anti-communist oath for those joining the military to weed them out? Because they are a threat, and we can see the danger that communism poses to humanity in general and to the United States specifically. What can we do legislatively to try to weed out communists
Well,
from leadership?
they already have a loyalty oath. You got to swear to support and defend the Constitution. If you're enlisted, you got to also swear that you'll obey lawful orders by your superiors. So that's a loyalty oath in effect. But I wouldn't be in favor of passing a new law because, first of all, that'll be immediately challenged in court, and then there'll be a distraction off of what is more productive and more to the heart of the matter. Now we'll be arguing about loyalty oaths. So I think we just need to enforce the existing laws and to have more people participate and more people to press. We want to press the Republican Congress to pass into law these executive orders and other things that will permanently keep DEI out of our institutions.
I'll tell you, it's a great question. No on the loyalty oaths. And the reason why I say that, in post-World War II Japan, Douglas MacArthur realized that in order to have political diversity, he needed to allow the Communist Party to actively operate in Japan because there was only one other political party. And he thought that was dangerous because it would lead to loyalty oaths and that sort of thing. So he promoted political diversity. The other thing that we could be doing, and of course Mike's been involved in this, the only court that's been established in the U.S. Constitution is the U.S. Supreme Court. All the other courts below the U.S. Supreme Court are established by Congress. So Congress has constitutional authority over the way those courts operate. And most recently, you heard Senator Schumer brag about putting 238 progressive judges into their seats. And now we see how that plays out. There's, 65 injunctions already against this president going into his 100th day in office? Previous presidents had, 6, 8 during 8 years of presidency? And he's got 65 already. And this is coming from these progressive judges that Democrats put in to those positions. Congress has a role in dealing with that. And so that's what you need to be telling your congressman, hey, whoa, wait a minute, don't let this monster continue to roam around the United States. Let's check them. So that's just an idea, but.
Let me add one thing to that, and that is, historically, Congress has abolished judicial positions, like back in the 1800s. They have limited the jurisdiction or what could be done. And a lot of things, remedies that are proposed and talked about now that then the left opposes, if you go back historically, this is stuff's not new, it's just new to us. I mean, communism's new, but these conflicts and abuses of power is not new. And so, you're next, ma'am.
God bless you both for your efforts and all that you're doing in the name of Jesus. What can we do to support our military families in regards to the woke indoctrination in their K through 12 schools on military bases? How can we support them? In Oceanside, California alone, our military families speak up at school board meetings. Their lives are being threatened, their children are being threatened, and they are going to their commanding officers, and now they are in fear to speak out. Their educational services are being taken away from children and more.
All right. Educate, educate, educate. And what you got to do is go above the people that are causing the problem, to their commanders, to the congressmen, to the media. So in the little microcosm of a school board or town council or whatever, they're powerful. But everybody's got a superior. And what you've got to do is engage and organize. Now, I'm very impressed with the Republican Party here. See, if you want to grow the Republican Party, it's not, you don't grow the Republican Party just because we want more Republicans. What you do is convince people there's a terrible problem that's affecting you and your children and grandchildren's future. And the only organization that can stop this politically, the only way to stop it is political. And the only organization that can do it is the Republican Party. So if you've never been a Republican, you're supporting the Republican Party and joining with them now because that's the only practical solution. So you organize and have meetings and decide how are we going to engage? How do we go over their head? And how do you embarrass them by exposing what they're doing? They don't want, that's why they limit how much you can talk, or they say you can't talk at this meeting. And one of their techniques, if you read Rules for Radicals, and now I'm halfway through a book called Rules for Conservatives to counter the Rules for Radicals, you'll see that their techniques are to, in part, to intimidate you, to guilt you, so you got to fight back. Now, I have the mental image of what about all these people that gave their lives and got shot at and maimed and killed? I mean, I'm safe. We're safe, pretty much. And even if we have some risks, what about the people that risked their lives in their sacred honor when they signed the Declaration of Independence? That's the real deal, not to mention going out there and fighting a superior force called the British Army. So I think that should motivate all of us to figure out how we're going to be heard, but you try to go over the head. If I see somebody in the military that's being abusive, I just don't go to that person to complain. I go 3 steps above them, and now it filters down, and now they know that they're being scrutinized by people above them. Anything?
Thank you.
Yes, sir. All right.
We'll make a statement before I make a question here. I think it would be a great idea if we could figure out a way to get these videos to go viral on Camp Pendleton, just half an hour away. Okay. So you say that the teaching at the academies and presumably teaching of the enlisted ranks all across the country is infected with this DI stuff. And but the last 100 days, we've seen a massive reversal with the new administration and Congress. If that continues apace, and assuming that we continue to have the right parties for another 8 years, and it doesn't get flip-flopped in 4 years, assuming that, even assuming that, how are you going to deal with all those who have already gone through the system, already gone through West Point, and have been brainwashed with these things, or other universities, or come in and now are teaching not just at the academies, but also all the places elsewhere where groups are being led. All the people who are entrenched, and it means bad enough in the military, you can fire people easily, but in universities it's even possible to fire people who are tenured. I mean, the entrenchment of this philosophy is not going to go away with one president. It's going to take decades to clean this out.
Well, first of all, I don't agree that we can't get rid of it in civilian universities because of the power of the purse.
Not quickly.
Pardon?
It can't be done quickly.
No, we can't do it quickly. It's so embedded, and the left's not going to give up. It's like all this money has been routed to leftists through all the spending, and you see through the Doji Commission and all these bogus NGOs that, how about $2 billion to the person who ran for governor in Georgia, for example. So what we got to do is keep plugging away. And what I like about, many things I like about President Trump, he's got an extremely competent staff, and extremely competent members of his, head of his agencies, and they're very aggressive, and they've been preparing for this, and they're going bam, 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 so fast and so aggressively that the left can't even regroup to figure out how to push it back. And we just need to keep doing the same. But we need grassroots support, and we need and grassroots pushback against the Democrats. You're really gonna vote to keep parents from having a veto power over whether what books your children are going to read, this sort of thing. I promise you that the elected officials. There are people who care what their people think out of fear, if nothing else, because they don't want to lose an election. So, no, this is not going to be fast. We just have to be methodical. They're looking at the long game. Now we're looking at the long game because we have to do it to save our country.
Okay, I think we're going to wrap this up. So let me, on behalf of Mike and myself and STARRS, thank you all for coming out and letting us tell our story, and just to encourage you to help. And there's so much that can be done. And, I want to thank the folks that hosted us here, Pastor Joshua, Pastor Gary, and our political hosts, John Leonard and David Marco. I'll tell you, what you've done is incredible, and we're humbled to be part of what you're doing to help turn California back to a reasonable state. So anyway, thank you very much for listening to us as we shared our story with you.